What's up, guys? My name's Mariano. Thanks for listening to the Happy Pups Training Podcast. Let's dive right into this because in this episode, I want to talk about Bella. Bella is a 6-year-old Labrador. She's got some reactivity issues. She's very territorial. She was extremely anxious, and it was a lot of good stuff for me to have the opportunity to work on with the owners. Now, I want to go over their timeline for training start to finish, and it's a little funny. We did 2 weeks with her initially, and when she went home, the owners didn't keep up with the private lessons afterwards, so they ended up calling me back a few months later, and I ended up doing another week with her and actually just dropped her off earlier today. So when I first met her and they first told me about her, I walk in the house, she's lunging, she's barking, they're holding her back with a leash and a flat buckle collar, and I can see her hackles, she's nervous, and so I knew I already had some work cut out for me. But then they tell me that she's territorial on walks, not to mention her obedience is terrible, but territorial on walks, very nervous in the crate. She's attacked the other dogs in the house if they get too close to her food while she's eating. She's attacked other dogs out and about if they get too close to a ball that she's carrying, and she's got a lot of good stuff for me to dig into. So I explained to the owners that when you're working with a dog like this, it's important to understand that they need structure, they need guidance, and as weird as it sounds and as hard of a sell as it can be sometimes, they need restrictions. Restrictions are too often that piece of training that would offer a dog so much value in terms of teaching them to relax, teaching them what behaviors are absolutely unacceptable, and by doing so, we limit options, which makes things simpler so that they could understand what they should be doing and what we want them to be doing because it's best for them. So I take her home. The first few things we work on are the basics in order to get her into a calmer frame of mind. Crate, threshold, structured walk. I work the crate manners. If she fights me on the way in, I pull the leash into the door and hold tension. I don't yank her in, but I hold tension until she gives up, yields to the leash, and walks in. I correct for any nonsense in the crate, any whining, any pushing, any trying to bend her way out, and I make sure that she's respectful coming out. I open the door. If she tries to bolt, I slam it, and I do it again until she understands I need to wait. Just because the door's open doesn't mean I'm free to go. After that, we're unleashed. We head to the gate. We're working on that. I want her to stop and wait. Any thresholds that she hits in or outside, we stop, we sit, then we continue. The very first few walks I did with her, I wasn't working on cultivating an actual heel just yet, but I was using a prong collar in order to manage her state of mind and get a bit of a handle on her. So we're out and about. She's shivering, panting, and drooling. I'm giving her little corrections for everything that she tries to tune into, like squirrels and loud cars, but I'm not too meticulous yet about her positioning. So I'm working on that. I bring her back and I work the out command. So we're working on food. When I fed her that night, she didn't eat anyway, but the next morning she was hungry and she ate. So I fed her and I would work the out command. I'd be on e-collar and I'd have her back tied just to avoid any possibility for conflict. I'd correct. I'd work low level stuff. I'd say out, I jump onto the e-collar, I pull her in the opposite direction with the leash so that she understands to disengage from the food. She really had a hard time with this at first. I really had to dial up on the numbers to get her to understand to let it go. But over time, she starts to understand I need the e-collar less and less, and then I don't need it at all. She does good work with her obedience. I get a chance to socialize her with my dogs. She goes home. I explain to the owners in our first lesson what I would like to see from them, and the first thing that they were interested in is immediately, when can we socialize her? How do we go about socializing her? And I try to explain to them, let's take things steps at a time. What I'd really like to see you do for this week until next lesson is really work structure. I'd like you to run this week the way I ran board and train program at my house. Very limited freedom. When you're not home, she's in the crate. When she's unsupervised, she's in the crate. When she is supervised, she can be working in a place command, in a recall, in a downstay. She's on e-collar, she's on prong collar. Every walk you do is highly structured. Any staring or posturing toward dogs is highly correctable. She needs this because she needs the reassurance that you can control what's going on around her. And I try to explain to the owners, I can say to you in English, you need to guide this dog, but a dog needs to be shown. So the way to show the dog is by dictating the tempo of the walk, by deciding this is okay, that's okay, but this is not okay. You're not going to do that. Instead, let's have you do this. That builds trust, and trust makes way for respect. And that's the good stuff that you work toward when you've got a dog that's got these nervous behaviors. So the owners seem into it and they're working, and a week comes around and I just don't hear from them, and I text them and they say we'll hold off because she's doing a good job, and then I just don't hear from them anymore. So I assume no news is good news, because if it were bad news I would assume that they'd call me and ask me what's going on. So I don't hear from them. Time goes by, a few months, until about last week, and then they call me and saying she's acting up again. Would it be possible to do another week board and train with her? Now, I went to the house to talk to them, and I explained to them, I can do this work, but this time I really need you to understand that no matter what any dog trainer does, if you're not willing to maintain the boundaries and the structure and the restrictions that we set for her, she's never going to improve, because it's easy for a trainer to live this lifestyle with her, and it's easy for a trainer to establish a healthy relationship with her. But if you don't do it as the owner, I'm fighting a losing battle. I've got her for a week, you've got her for the rest of her life. If you're not doing what you need to be doing, she's just gonna revert right back to it as soon as she comes home and she gets a taste of all these old triggers and being around all these familiar faces. So he says he understands that. I took her, I put her in her crate. She had a very hard time, probably harder than the first board and train, that night in the crate. She was barking, she was whining, drooling, circling in the crate. She was freaking out. So when I heard her barking, it was right about midnight, I correct on the e-collar. She stops barking, but she starts whining. I corrected that. She's panting, and if she starts panting a little too hard, I correct that. And over time, I try to reel her in and get her to calm down. And she made tremendous progress. She was still nervous, but she made huge progress. And the next day, it kind of spilled over. So she's still nervous in the crate, panting, a little whine here and there. No barking. And if I'm working another one of my training dogs and she sees them walking back and forth, she gets even more nervous. So what I started doing, on top of structured walk, the crate, the threshold, and her obedience with that she already knew from last time, was I tried to explain to the owners what I was going to do in terms of using obedience in order to work on state of mind. Because there's a difference. I've met tons of dogs that know their commands, but can still be nervous, can still be aggressive, can still be pushy. So that crossover can be a messy topic sometimes because people aren't quite sure how one becomes the other or when this happens. So what I did with her was work place command around other dogs. I let my dogs exist around her. They're kind of moving around doing their thing. I don't let them bother her. I don't let them come up and approach her, because if I don't protect her, she's going to lose trust and respect for me. So I let them do their thing around, but if they're too wily, if they're too rambunctious, I calm them down. If they're too close to her, I shoo them off of her. But at the same time, she is not allowed to engage with my guys at all. If they walk by her, I don't want so much as a look. I don't want so much as her go from panting to shut her mouth. I don't want too hard of a stare. I don't want even the lowest of growls or hackles. All of this stuff was correctable. And if during the correction or before she gets up from her place command, that's correctable, and then I put her back. And the reason why I do this is because it teaches her to prioritize what's important. If she understands that she can't react to these dogs one way or the other, she starts to actively avoid them because they get her in trouble. She sees them, she feels the need to do something, it's that anxious feeling. She gets up or she barks, she's corrected. So she starts to tune them out altogether, and my guys walk by and she looks the other way. And that's a good decision, and that's what I wanted at the time. I want to work toward her liking dogs, but first, the reality is I've got to get her to not hate them. Once I can take that step, then we can work on the liking them part. So I had to work out these bad habits that she had ingrained into herself of see dog and attack dog, and there was no thought process as to why. I attribute it to like a person who drinks too much coffee. Even if all the bills are paid, even if all the chores are done, and you've got nothing that you need to do, you feel like you should be doing something. And because the way you feel doesn't align with what you know, you get nervous about it because something feels wrong. Dogs tend to operate that same way. The reality is my guys were no threat to her, but in her mind they were, so she felt the need to do one thing or another. As I made those things unacceptable, she tried to bark, I correct, so she doesn't bark next time. She gets up, I correct, and she's going through her options until she gets to, let me just lay here, these guys aren't that big a deal, I'm just gonna hang out. When she got better with this, I started working recall around the guys, and then I started working heel, not just a structured walk like earlier, but a real solid heel. I want her in a very specific position. When I stop, you sit. If I speed up, slow down, turn around, you better be paying attention. And she's healing with me and my other dogs. So we're all in a pack. The dogs are close enough to each other to be bumping into each other, but she's made progress and she's tuned in, so she's not making an issue of it. No hackles, no nonsense. She's focusing on me, and because she's doing such a good job, I've actually started praising much more than I did in the beginning. Now after this, I started working on long duration downstays. Not necessarily place command because I'd be be out and about at the mall or wherever. And the reason why I do the downstay is because I want her to learn to tune other distractions out. Not everything scares dogs, but even if it's something that excites her, like a person that wants to play with her, I don't allow it. If someone comes up, hey, can I pet your dog? You know what? I'm very sorry. She's in training right now. Maybe next time. Advocate for the dog. If she doesn't like certain types of people approaching her, if she doesn't like dogs approaching her, it's okay for you to say no to other people. In fact, it's essential, because if you're not willing to protect the dog, why should she trust you? And if she doesn't trust me, she's going to take it upon herself to protect herself, hence the aggression. So we work on this stuff. I only had her for a week this second time, so by this time it's about sending her home time. It was earlier today. I did one last Instagram video. I bring her home and I really drilled the owner. This is what I did. Let's go for a walk. And I cannot express this to you adamantly enough. If you don't continue this work, you're just going to call me back in another few months. She's never going to get better. I can't tell you just how essential it is that you do this. It's easy to train a dog, but an owner maintaining a dog, that's when the stakes are high. Understand that as a trainer, you come in from day one as somebody who sets boundaries, who makes the dynamic of the relationship very clear. But when you're working with an owner, now you've got a dog that's got history. You've got a dog that's spent maybe years, in her case 5 or 6 years, having dad wrapped around her little finger. So when dad starts trying to apply some structure and some boundaries, she is more inclined to resist. She wants instead to just be back home where she's comfortable and just live the life that she lived before. So dad really has to make up some ground that I didn't necessarily have to make up, because I was never put in that position. Dad really has to empower himself in his eyes and her eyes, and it's not an easy transition. Getting owners to understand how an e-collar not only doesn't make fearful dogs more fearful, but really does amazing things to make them better can be tricky. I explained to him, if she is reacting toward other dogs and he's afraid that the e-collar is going to cause negative associations, if she's reacting and she's uneasy, those negative associations are already there. That's why you called me. That's why I'm here. Correcting is not going to make that worse. Leaving it alone will make it worse. Correcting reminds her that that's not acceptable behavior, and instead I want you to do this, maybe a heel, maybe a down. But by giving her that boundary, you start to express control, which is what she wanted. Then she can feel comfortable. Now you're leading her. Now you're a leader. Now it's your job to protect her and yourself and the house, and not hers. So that weight is taken off of her. A lot of dogs sort of find themselves in these funny positions where they're like full-time bodyguards, and they were never meant to be. So when you alleviate them of that pressure, then you find dogs that are in a healthier headspace and willing to make much better choices. So I dropped her off today. I couldn't express that enough to the owner. I feel like I beat that dead horse a ton, but you know what? I really wanted them to understand. You need to keep up with this. It's essential. I can't say it enough. It doesn't matter what trainer you call. If you don't do the work, there's nothing we can do for you. I explained to them, we'll be doing our lessons. I'll come back next week. I'll come back the week after that, because a big thing with this owner, even with the first board and train program, the second she gets home, the first thing they ask me is, when can we start socializing her with other dogs? And I guess I understand from an owner's standpoint. You just sent her to training. She looks a lot better. You're excited, you're confident, so you really want to push the envelope, but that's not the way it works when you've got a nervous dog, especially considering the owners still have a lot of work to do to practice holding her accountable. Trainers are pretty good at that sort of thing. Owners need to be taught what to look for, what to correct, what not to allow, what is okay to allow, when to praise, how much to praise. So I don't want to throw too much at them. So I told them, let's not even think about socializing for now. What I want you to do is do your absolute best to recreate my board and train program, but at home. If you're not here, she's in the crate. If you're not supervising her, she's in the crate. When she's not in the crate, she's working. She's in place. She's down. She's healing. She's recalling. When you're out and about, that walk should be immaculate. Total structure. Release her here and there to go to the bathroom, but don't let her mark everything. Don't let her stare at other dogs. No engagement. I don't want her trying to find that old arousal pattern. Now that she's home, it's only more tempting because everything is familiar. Really hammer that idea home. You have to make it believable and understood that I am dad. All of that nonsense that Mariano didn't find okay, it's not okay here anymore either. None of that stuff is gonna fly. I need this and this from you. And maybe in the future, in a couple lessons, then we'll talk about socializing when you know how to manage your dog in a healthy, helpful space. That's where we are now. I really hope that they keep up with me. I'm going to try to keep up with them. I do want to make sure that this dog gets better, and I hope that this was informative, so I'll recap it and then I'll finish it here. I get the dog, I work the very basics. Whenever you've got a dog, always start with the basic stuff. The crate, the thresholds, a structured walk, and then you move on. Heel, sit, down, stay, place, recall. Then you start using obedience when they're solid with it. That's when you introduce the e-collar and you start working things around the distraction or the motivation or the fear or the anxiety causing stimulus. You correct for engagement, and then you give the command to make things simple for them. Correct the dog. No, you don't look at that bike. You don't lunge at that bike. I said heel. Correct them to stop the behavior and to inhibit the behavior in the future. So make sure that your corrections are firm enough that you're not underwhelming your dog. If the corrections aren't valuable, you're not helping. You're not getting anywhere. If you're not saying no in a way that the dog understands and respects, you're saying yes. And always keep that in mind. Correct early. Don't wait for the dog to react. As soon as the dog stares, as soon as they break focus from the heel, correct. A good correction. That will inhibit future behaviors. Then when the dog starts to make better choices, then the fun can come back in, because training isn't about just correcting. It's not about domineering a dog. But the reality is, tearing down old habits can be tricky. Old habits die hard, and it's before we replace them that we tear them down. It's hard to teach new habits on top of old ones because the old ones bleed into the new ones, and then you've got a dog that's trained in obedience but still reactive. And I've met a ton of those. So you break down those old habits, you really work to bring the dog to neutral, put him in a healthy state of mind, and then you build them back up on a steady foundation. When you bring the dog home, help the owner understand the most important part of training is how well they are going to do when they get their dog back. Your dog loves you, but they trust and respect me. And I need them to love, trust, and respect you. That's going to take some work. You've got a history that you need to work to eliminate. You need to teach the dog, I'm not the same guy that I was. I am going to guide you, I'm going to lead you, and I need you to go along with the program here. So keep that in mind. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you guys next time.